Coming up on Hidden Battles with Phyllis Walker.
There are detectives that go into crimes against children. After 2 years, you're not even really good at your job yet. They're breaking down and bowing out. He couldn't get through a case because of the content. He had a small child, and once he saw the images, he just could not function anymore. Have them watch videos of children interacting sexually with adults. Eventually, as with human nature, it's going to desensitize the child and normalize it. I found my fourth victim, but by sheer accident. Because how do you find a 5-year-old? How do you find a 9-year-old that's in a picture? Keep your outside hobby. That's maybe why I did the job so long, because I rode horses the entire time. It matters. It matters to people who can't protect themselves. It matters across the universe.
Welcome to Harmless, the podcast. I'm your host, Eric Oldenburg, and today I'm having a conversation with a very good longtime friend of mine. Her name is Phyllis Walker. Phyllis and I met in 2003 when I was working on the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force as an investigator. Phyllis was a child crimes investigator with the Glendale Police Department, and Glendale is a suburb of Phoenix. I had occasion to contact her to assist me with the interview of someone that had come across my desk, and we struck up a friendship, and I have known her ever since. In 2007, I was assigned to the Department of Public Safety Computer Forensic Lab. I was assigned to the Arizona Department of Public Safety, the state police computer forensic lab. About a year later, Phyllis was assigned to the lab as well as a computer forensic examiner for the city of Glendale. Now, this conversation is a little bit different than the other conversations I've had because I know Phyllis very well and have known her for a very long time. I care for Phyllis very much. We still talk almost daily. And because we know each other so well, I actually talk a lot more in this podcast than I do in most, just to kind of explain to you how things were set up and how things worked where we worked. I am super thankful for Phyllis being open and honest, and quite honestly, for the work that she's done and the suffering she's endured in order to further these efforts. So without further ado, I give you Hidden Battles with Phyllis Walker.
I started in law enforcement in 1996, and I worked for a bankruptcy judge prior to that for about 8 years. I worked patrol for 4 years. I worked what we called a knock and talk squad for about 6 months. It was a drug interdiction squad where people's neighbors would call in. There's high traffic. I think they're selling drugs. Me and my partner would go in uniform and knock on the door and ask to come in. And amazingly, they let us in. So then I took the detective test.
What was your aim? Where do you think you wanted to go with being a detective?
Honestly, I wanted to go to crimes against children.
Why?
Because I thought that if I could get them to tell me what they swore they'd never tell anybody, I could pretty much work anything. I went into the unit in early 2000, and I worked hands-on offenses. I enjoyed doing the hands-on investigations because I got to talk to kids. I interviewed children from the age of 3 to 14, hands-on offenses and child abuse, but it was mostly exploitation of children. And in Arizona, the laws are very stiff when it comes to hands-on offenses. So if you had 3 or 4 offenses, they were looking at 75, 100 years. So if they took a plea to 20, it was good. I was really good at interview and interrogation of suspects because I gave them the opportunity to be understood. By the time I even hit topic, I knew if they were fucking their wife, what kind of porn they watched, how their job was going, what kind of drugs they were doing, things that were happening in the home, because obviously they didn't want to talk about the topic I was there to talk about, so they would talk about everything else. I could go through their whole life in an hour and a half with them, and then by the time I hit topic, they were so comfortable talking to me that came out.
Why do you think they were so comfortable talking to you? What did you do that others weren't doing?
I just talked to them and pretended to get to know them and pretended to empathize. Everybody wants to be understood. They have something they have never told anybody. If I can be that friend to let them unburden themselves, I was always that person. So anyway, I can't I had several cases of hands-on things that really were horrific. Most of them were. It's about 2005. We had a case of a 7-year-old that went to school and tried to commit suicide and ended up disclosing that dad had been abusing her pretty horrifically.
7? Suicide at 7?
Yeah, she was 7. She had genital warts so bad from father that she had to have a reconstructive surgery on her urethra.
Jesus.
Then in 2006, I had a case that probably people would think, oh, it wasn't a big deal. But when I interviewed the victim, she was in a rehab and on probation because she had been acting out, of course. She was 14, and the suspect was stepdad. The county attorney didn't want to file the case because it was a penis rub between the legs, and she was using the term raped, and they wanted me to re-interview her to describe the rape, which was the penis rub between the legs. Fast forward, and honestly, that's all I had was her statement. Mom and dad would not interview separately from each other. Dad was stepdad. This is the case that pushed me into computer crimes because I thought I could get away from some of the trauma.
You mean the trauma of hearing about it and talking to the victims?
Yes, I went to computer crimes because I thought I could get away from the trauma of talking to the victims and living with that.
Yeah.
So this story that I'm discussing, it started in 2006, but then it continued on until about late 2007, 2008. Stepdad talked her into his van and took her out to the desert and actually raped her. And she broke loose at some point and ran through the desert naked and bloodied and hit a barbed wire fence at some point. And then finally got a trucker to stop for her on I-10. She was abducted by her stepfather right out of her home. And the only reason she got into the van with him was it was on the premise of teaching her to drive. That case hit me really hard because that child had my cell phone number and would call me prior to this attack, would call me every 3 weeks begging me to take her out of the home. He hadn't done anything because I would ask her every single time, has he done something? She would say, no, he's scared of me. The reason I got involved was because she called me and told me about the rape because it was a different jurisdiction and I didn't know it had happened. He actually abducted her from Peoria. So Peoria took jurisdiction.
And this one hit you
Anyway.
so hard that
I needed to do something else. I was friends with you and some of the other guys like Dave and Chris Curley, the ICAC guys, because I was the liaison for the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, part of Glendale. So I knew a couple of you guys had already gone to the lab.
Yeah.
Some people at the lab were telling me that the person at the lab was not doing very well because they could not get through a whole case of child exploitation. He couldn't get through a case because of the content. He had a small child, and once he saw the images, he just could not function anymore. During working hands-on cases, I don't know what year it was, but we eventually started asking children at the end of the interviews, has anyone else done something like this? Has anyone taken pictures? Because we started to run across so much digital media that corroborated the child's statement, the hands-on offenses. During that time, when we would find pictures, we would deal with the doctors at Child Help So we would deal with Kathy Kaufman quite a lot to give a sexual maturity rating to the images that we found, whether they be of the child that I was interviewing or if it might be just grooming material that was used to get the child to do the act. Pictures of younger kids interacting sexually with adults. If you normalize it enough, have them watch videos and pictures of children interacting sexually with adults or interacting sexually with each other, eventually, as with human nature, it's going to desensitize the child to that and normalize it. So that's grooming. We just started finding a lot more and more digital images.
This is the early 2000s, right?
Yes, this is early 2000s.
YouTube doesn't even exist yet.
Yeah.
When I started in '01, our internet crimes unit, they were on dial-up accounts, and my job was to move them to high-speed internet. That was how long ago it was. I got a Gmail account in 2003 on a beta invite from my brother. It was not a household name. We didn't Google things back then. No one even used those terms. And
No.
these pictures that you're taking, are they 4K? No, they're run-of-the-mill cell phone sneaky pictures, right?
Exactly that. Either sneaky pictures or pictures taken on the premise of this is fun. We would interact with the doctors quite a bit. And I had already been obviously experiencing these pictures because I would have to do a physical description of the picture that I saw for charging. So I had already been doing this part of that investigations for a long time, since 2000.
During your time doing hands-on offenses, you encountered digital images of children, grooming material. You encountered that as a part of your investigations. And when you weighed the difference between viewing that material, studying the material, describing the material, that was less of an emotional burden on you than hearing it from the children. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly what I thought at the time.
Yeah. And there was no reason to think otherwise. This is a picture. I'm interacting with a real human child that's telling me this, and it's heartbreaking. And I can feel their emotion. They're right there, and I can't do anything. I'm throwing them everything I can, but they're not grabbing the life ring, and you're watching them drown in front of you. Totally understand that. And then at the time, nobody told you that, hey, within the next couple years, you're going to go from finding a couple of hundred pictures to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of images, right?
Tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands.
Yes. And now millions and multi-millions.
Yes. So I thought it was the less of two evils.
In hindsight, it's not really super crazy because you have to acknowledge the trauma incurred listening to a child tell you about the most unnatural act, a horrific, brutal act, that then you have to go back and you have to listen to that interview again. You got to watch it. You've got to document it. You have to hear this child over and over and over. And this isn't a video of a child being brutalized or exploited. This is a several hour-long interview with a child.
We spent most of our time typing because we had to write out basically synopsis of the interview we had with the child.
Yeah.
And the individual acts. So while rewatching the interview that we just conducted with the child, we would have to go through and pick out each charge or different sex act that was conducted with or on the child for the charging and typing from that.
You are not copying a memo from a commander to a chief. Yes, you were typing the whole time, but what were you typing?
We were typing that I interviewed a 3-year-old who knew what truth and a lie was and could say some of their ABCs, and then about having to put her mouth on her stepfather's penis while in the bathroom or during a game of hide and seek.
Phyllis, that's horrible.
So of course I thought the computer part was going to be way easier.
Because there's a disconnect between this is a photograph of someone that I don't know, could have been taken today, could have been taken 10 years ago. Who knows? So you can disconnect. I can completely see that line of thinking.
Oh, if we had only known.
Yep.
Anyway, I go to the lab and get the position in computer forensics.
Now, this is the DPS State Lab that is
Yes.
located in Phoenix. The DPS State Lab, where Phyllis and I both worked concurrently as computer forensic examiners, our time there overlapped. 25-person lab, roughly, 25 workstations from several different agencies. DPS had 5 or 6 examiners. Phoenix PD had 5 or 6 examiners. Glendale had 1. The smaller suburban cities, Tempe, Glendale, Mesa, they all had 1 or 2 examiners in there. But for the most part, it was about 5 Phoenix, 5 DPS, maybe 3 or 4 Maricopa County Sheriff, and then the rest were all like filled in with smaller agencies.
That's correct. But I had just come from that horrific case with the girl and the stepfather, the one that was raped in the desert. It was the catalyst for me to leave. And I couldn't really see myself working burglary because who cares? Your stuff got stolen. And I don't know if you recall, but then my dad got sick right when I first went there. He lived in South Carolina and we were in Arizona. I was flying back and forth to deal with that and randomly got married during that time.
To Grant?
Yeah. I get trained up and I actually was able to do computer forensics because, as everyone knows, I can't even set up my own Wi-Fi. So I got to the lab in 2008 and just started working cases. And my specialty was obviously child exploitation because that was my investigative level.
But not only, Phyllis, was that your specialty for that reason, but nobody realized if you looked at the monthly reports that they would put out at the lab, it would be how many gigabytes of data did you review, did you analyze? How many gigabytes of data? How many reports did you author? How many pieces of digital media did you seize? What types of investigations did you do this month? What type of data did you look at this month? And every single time they released that report, they had a bar graph that went across for all the different crime types: homicide, drug, anything. Fraud. Yeah, exactly. Whatever, missing persons. And then there were these little tiny towers in your little bar graph. And then child exploitation was far and beyond. Even the combination of all of those other crime types combined would not equal how much data we had to review, how much child exploitation we had to analyze every month.
I knew from working with ICAC and Phoenix guys like yourself that you guys were backed up.
Yeah.
When DPS said you can have a spot, and DPS paid to train me in the computer forensic part, I took cases for DPS, obviously Phoenix. I worked a lot of those because you guys were backed up. So that's what I just ended up doing my whole time there. I was the Glendale ICAC investigator at the time. Someone new came into child crimes. When I moved out of hands-on, someone else came in. And we would do those National Center for Missing and Exploited Children cyber tips. And then I had to give those to someone else to start doing, but they were new at the job. So I was working mostly cases for the Department of Public Safety, other small cities that would send stuff to DPS, and a lot of Phoenix cases because you guys were really behind.
Yes. 2 years.
Yes. So my numbers were up, even though Glendale really wasn't producing a lot for me because I was working Phoenix cases.
Right.
While I was working the hands-on material, I got involved with the ICAC grant that was brand new. I became a member of an affiliate agency to the ICAC task force and had done some training with them. I went to the DPS lab so I could put in for grant money to provide me equipment and things. which is another reason I worked very hard on Phoenix cases.
And you were getting support from the Arizona ICAC task force, right? So you got funded to get help with your computer forensic examinations, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And that's why I felt the drive to work on the ICAC cases, because they were so far behind, and that's what I was getting money for.
So you started doing these cases. You were helping Phoenix out. You're helping out your own agencies, taking on cases that people don't have time to do.
That's correct.
At what point did you realize that, wow, this is a lot more material than I was expecting to see on a daily basis?
I don't think there was an exact time when I thought, oh, there's a lot, like I'm doing a lot of more terabytes of information. Gradually snuck up on us.
Yeah, of
One
course.
day you have 2 thumb drives, maybe 2 hard drives, and that's about it. And then in a year from then, you have 2 terabytes of information, which are not only on an external hard drive, but there's some of the same images are spread out between thumb drives and other hard drives. So the same images over and over again on multiple different devices.
They copy it, they duplicate it to other stuff, and then they forget to delete it or whatever. They get careless because it's their own stuff. One of the things people don't really think about is the fact that as the internet exploded and we went from dial-up accounts to high-speed internet around 10 megabits to now we're in gigabit speed, people realize that the technology increased super fast, but they don't think sometimes the amount of affordable digital storage also increased exponentially as well. So you went from these hard drives that could maybe hold a couple of movies, a couple of 15-minute movies. And when I first started, when I got my forensic, when I went and did my CFCE class in Florida, when I came back to do my problems, the first 4 of them were floppy disks. That's how
Mine
long
was
ago.
too.
Yeah, yes. And here's the thing, not a lot of people were using floppy disks in 2009, but
Nope.
remember, a lot of offenders had put material on floppy disks years ago that they have in their house. And each floppy disk, for reference, holds 1.44 megabytes of data. If you have a standard Apple iPhone right now or a Samsung, you pull your phone out of your pocket and you take a picture. That photograph, at a bare minimum, is going to be 5 megabytes. Just one photograph, at a bare minimum. It could be up to 30 megabytes, depending on how your settings are. So this is how tiny it was, and the photographs were small enough that they could actually put them on there. They could put multiple images on a floppy disk. They could put all the things that they could get on floppy disks. But before you know it, within a year or two, one day we have floppy disks, the next day we have zip drives. Think of the amount of storage, the amount of material an offender can store on one device that we have to look at. Because you don't just find the images for charging, right? You got to go through all of it.
All of it. Even the duplicates, you got to document what's there.
You had this window into the world from a different angle. You were looking at it from, these are hands-on offenses, and hey, these offenders are also taking photographs of these children, and they have child exploitation for grooming material. Did you have any thought back then of the actual children in the pictures?
Of course, I did, because I had found so much in households of the hands-on victim that I've already interviewed, and then we find the media to back it up. I had a case in 2006 when I was working hands-on, and Roger Hoover was at the lab and he did my forensics. I had 4 hands-on victims who were between 8 and 10, a set of 2 sisters, 1 offender who had done this before in 92 and got out, but in 92 his victims were 14 and 15. I had 4 hands-on victims. 2 of them were sisters. 1 lived in the house with the offender, and another unknown victim. And I'm talking children between the ages of 8 and 10. The 2 sisters who were between 8 and 10 had disclosed. The girl in the house did not disclose anything that the other girls said. And then I have an unknown 9-year-old somewhere. We found images of an unknown child, 9-year-old. Her first name was Amanda. and we don't know who her parents are. The county attorney, Lisa Andrus, was screaming at me to find this child. She's like, "You need to find this other child." And I'm like, "She's not. She doesn't have a driver's license. She's 9 years old." So I went to all the schools that my victim in the house went to and looked at every picture I could find at those schools. Still couldn't find the 9-year-old. 6 months later, Peoria gives me a call and asks me about my suspect. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "They have my victim. They have her in another case." And when the forensic interviewer asked her if anyone else had done anything or taken pictures, she disclosed my guy. I don't know how a Peoria detective even got to me, other than maybe the guy's name, because he went by a nickname. Yeah, I found my fourth victim, but by sheer accident. Because how do you find a 5-year-old? How do you find a 9-year-old that's in a picture?
So
I mean,
so how do you answer that question? Do you answer that question with any possible way we can? Or do you answer that question with, it's just so impossible that how do we even start?
no. It's how do we do it? Do we look at the stuff at the back of the room? Do we study this picture that much? And we do. We have to.
Did you back then?
Yes. Okay. The case I was just talking about with the 4 victims.
Yeah.
Their house was very, they had rats in cages that were eating each other. There were things in the house that you could identify. I took pictures of the suspect's room, so I know what his room looks like. So can I identify that in the pictures that we find?
On a federal level, when they do victim identification work, that child could be anywhere in the planet, right? Talk about how do you find a 5-year-old in Glendale, Arizona? How do you find a 5-year-old on the planet with no leads? It's looking at it through a different lens. Now you have the imagery, and your job now is to connect the imagery to the actual physical location that you have been at. It's a little bit different of an approach. This is 2008. I didn't consider victim identification efforts until I went to a conference in Dallas in 2011. I attended a session, and it was on Project Vic, which turned out to be this huge effort to help individuals who are working these investigations identify known imagery. Project Vic is video and image categorization, but it also stands for victim identification. Part of the reason you want to identify the files that are known that we've seen before in the victim identification world is to weed out the files that law enforcement has already investigated, so we can focus on ones that they haven't been seen before, that we call first generation child exploitation material.
Yep.
So now we have this ability to get away or identify the noise, and by noise I mean chargeable images. It's not really noise. In the victim identification world, these are images that we're going to charge. Maybe some of the images that children have been identified already, maybe they have not, but law enforcement has seen them, and law enforcement has agreed that the child in this image is being exploited or abused and is under the age of 18 years old. So let's say we just do a search warrant on an offender's house. For whatever reason, we get a cyber tip, and the cyber tip says, this IP address uploaded these files to Dropbox, right? We go to that house, we identify the target, we go in there, we seize all the digital media that's in there. Years later, we learned to triage on scene, but back then we would take everything they had. And sometimes it was, like you said, a laptop and a thumb drive. And sometimes it was, I went to one, it was 28 computers networked in this guy's house. It was a complete nightmare. And so much digital evidence to go through. We would collect all that stuff. Then what you would find during your forensic examination is you would find typically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Phyllis, you would find a huge amount of adult pornography. And in some cases, you could see the offender actually go down this deeper, darker path with their pornography. And that's a whole nother conversation. But you'll see a whole bunch of adult pornography, and then you'll see these images that the software you're using or whatever hopefully has identified them as being seen before. And then that's where he's probably keeping all his material, so you focus there, and then boom, you find these images that were not identified in the Project Vic hash set that have metadata, and holy crap, this person may have taken these photographs. And that's where victim identification starts. And we might not know who the person that took the photograph is. We might not know where they took the photograph. We might not know who the child is, but we need to use the content, the visual content of that image to locate the offender, locate where the picture was taken. That's victim identification. And the reason we do that, and hopefully it is the new prevailing culture in the internet crimes against children world internationally, is we do that so that we can safeguard the children, so we can remove them from a potentially ongoing, horrific existence that they're living. That's why we don't just put pedophiles in jail. We go through the pedophiles to locate the children. That's who we work for in this world, and a lot of people forget that. The ICAC task force had no idea how depraved some of the material that you looked at was, some of the videos that just affect you viscerally.
Yeah.
But in order to rescue the children, in order to work for the children, you have to put yourself in that harm's way. You have to watch that video. You have to stop it. You got to freeze it. You got to try to figure out what that thing is, potentially match it to a known location. Like just like you had to spend so much time just to describe the imagery or to document the audio interview that you had with a child. You're playing the audio over and over about the child saying they touched you here, they touched you there. Now you're watching this video. They have been brutalized in that imagery.
You can hear them crying.
Yeah, the audio, again, is sometimes more...
It's worse.
Heart-wrenching than the actual video. I've had a couple forensic exams where I came across imagery and I'm like, holy shit, this is first-generation stuff. Sent it into the HSI Victim ID Lab in Fairfax, Virginia, and they come back, they're like, oh, they've already identified that imagery. I remember the rush when I felt that, holy shit, this guy's actually producing. And then to have your job, to have your effort be, now let's go find these kids. We got to go through him and find out whoever is in those pictures, in those videos being brutalized.
Completely agree in that area.
The victim identification efforts are extremely difficult, but before that, think of all the disparity amongst the chargeability of these files in different states.
The states are so different when it comes to stuff like that. But I spent a lot of time doing NCMEC reports or tips that weren't child exploitation. But the line is a feather. Like, it's thin. Like, there's the line between yes, it is, and no, it's not exploitation is ridiculous.
To further compound that problem, not only is that a fine line, but the definition of what child exploitation, whether it's illegal or just considered erotica or grooming material, is different in every single state. Yes, federally, you have one definition that works across the country, but we didn't charge all of our cases federally, especially in Arizona. Our sentencing guidelines were far and beyond anything they would get when we would prosecute federally. Now, most states, when I went around and taught in different states, and I've been in plenty of states teaching, most states, the federal sentencing is more strict than the state sentencing, so they push it up federally. But Arizona,
Nope.
we were the complete opposite.
Exactly. Because federally, they would have to have 3 exploitive images, when that all comes down to definition, to even have a charge. And then it was like, what, 5 years? And in Arizona, you get 10 an image.
That's mitigating. The presumptive is 17 per visual depiction. 10 is mitigating, 24 is aggravating.
But we're only allowed to charge 10 because anything above that is cruel and unusual punishment.
Yes. And here's why. In the state of Arizona, you go to trial and you're found guilty of sexual exploitation of a minor. 10 counts, the max that Phyllis just said. 10 counts. And the judge gives you the absolute most lenient sentence he possibly can give you based on the guidelines that he has to go by. She has to go by. The minimum they can sentence you to is 100 years in prison.
Right.
10 per image.
Right.
And you have to serve these sentences consecutively. There's no, he committed an assault during a robbery, so he's going to serve his robbery time and his assault time at the same time. Not in the state of Arizona, not having anything to do with child exploitation or child abuse. You have to serve it consecutively, which means you serve the first image for 10 years and then you stop and you serve the next 10, or you serve the first image 10 years, then you serve your next 10 years until you get through all your images. And it's cruel and unusual because nobody survives a 100-year sentence. What are you eligible for? And in the state of Arizona, you have to serve a minimum of 85% of your sentence. There's no way around that when it comes to these special sentencing guidelines relating to child offenses. This DCAC, this Dangerous Crimes Against Children sentencing, and I'll have Brad clarify all this.
Yeah.
This is just related to the sexual exploitation of a minor and any type of hands-on physical
offenses.
abuse to children, to anybody under the age of 15 in the state of Arizona. So, under the age of 15. So 14 and under. It was still illegal to have this imagery if it was under 18, but Arizona, and I absolutely agree with this, is they delineated about the age where we change from being a prepubescent child, which is what a pedophile is attracted to, into a developed child, which pedophiles aren't attracted to. A true pedophile is attracted to the prepubescent children. So the state of Arizona said at this point, which is very obviously, and it's different, children develop at different stages, it's a pretty good estimate of, hey, anything underneath this, we're probably dealing with a dangerous human being who will do very evil things to children. So they really hammered down on that in the state of Arizona. And I've traveled the world, quite literally the world, teaching investigators how to use software to help protect their mental health and speed up their investigations. And in every single one of those countries, without exception, we have at least twofold sentencing structure and sentencing outcomes than we have the most strict sentencing guidelines in the developed world when it comes to exploiting and hurting children here in the state of Arizona. Here's another thing that we need to address as well. We had this huge backlog in the city of Phoenix, and you were helping us out with that. The prosecutors wanted all the evidence looked at, every piece of digital media reviewed before they filed charges. We have a 2-year backlog. If the state is going to file charges against this person, of the trials that I'm aware of, the offender ever was exonerated or found not guilty, 99% chance you're going to lose. So we had a plea offer. The prosecutors, they're backed up too. They would give an offer of 10 to 24, which is basically you do time for one of the counts. That would be the offer. And 10 to 24 years is a long time. You would do 10 to 24 years, and you would have to do lifetime probation if you got out, or when you got out, and you are a registered sex offender for life. Those are the two tails that they call that in the state of Arizona. So in order to give this plea to somebody, the county attorney has to charge them first, right? Who is going to sign a plea that says, hey, after I sign this plea, if the police eventually find images that I created or child sex abuse material that I generated myself, I can't be charged with it. What defense attorney would ever have their client sign that plea? Once they sign the plea, everything stops. And now that puts the police department in this awkward situation where do we continue to look for unknown victims and take that time? Or do we just move on to the next case, forget about the victim identification efforts? And then what happens then is you're potentially putting a child in the evidence room to not be safeguarded, to be completely forgotten about because we're so backed up.
Yes.
The DPS state lab sergeant changed at one point, and he pulled me into his office because I had been there for a couple of years. I was a senior guy on Phoenix. So he pulls me in his office and he says, Eric, my DPS guys, and there were 5 of them doing computer forensics. There were 5 of them, and they had a 1.5-year backlog. And this sergeant sat me down and he said, Eric, why can't I just have my forensic examiners find the 10 images for charging and move on to the next case so we can get through this backlog? And I told him, and this was post victim identification was something that was even brought up in law enforcement relating to these crimes. There was a picture of his children on his desk behind him, 2 young boys, and they had soccer balls in their hands. And I said, hey, are those your kids? Because I'm a very trained observer, and I was able to deduce the fact that those could possibly be his children. So I said, hey, are those your kids? And he said, yeah. And I said, imagine their soccer coach gets arrested for trading child sex abuse material on the internet. And you found out that when they arrested him, they just found 10 pictures that matched some database that had been seen before, and then they moved on to the next case. How would you feel as a parent knowing that coach and the police didn't have the time to look to see if potentially your child was a victim? And he was like, holy shit. And from that point forward, he said, okay, we've got to go through all of it.
You do.
And if you truly put the children first, do you truly want to honor a child that doesn't have a voice?
Right.
I think you have to look at all the material on every piece of evidence that you collect, unfortunately.
But who's going to? I did it for 16 years. 16 years. And we have, of course, I'm super excited that I, at the time, was able to put safeguards in place for others that came behind me.
Explain. Talk about
Well,
another day.
there are detectives that go into crimes against children stuff that I did when I started in 2000 to about 2008. After 2 years where we're not even really good at your job yet, they're breaking down and bowing out. We had a guy who came into the crimes against children unit after I had gone to computer forensics, and he had little kids, and he did it for about 2 years, and he was a good detective. And then he realized he couldn't really do that job anymore, so he went back to patrol, but never came forward and asked for help. And in 2016, he drove his Jeep into a barricade.
God.
So there are detectives who are doing it for 2 years now, even back then, and not being able to go forward. What are we going to do in the future? You need to get good at the job.
Which takes about 3 years or so, in my estimation,
Right.
where you can handle just about anything, right?
But by that time,
They're already broken. They're already beaten down.
2 years.
They're mentally destroyed before they're even proficient at their job. Think about that.
Exactly. That's what's so frustrating, because somebody has to do this job.
I don't remember ever being warned about any type of mental health issues. Did anybody in Glendale, when they were signing up for the job,
No,
did anybody tell them this is what you're going to be dealing with?
you and I have done training with Shift, and they warn you that the job gets difficult. In the academy, they tell you keep your outside hobby, which I think that's maybe why I did the job so long, because I rode horses the entire time.
That was your coping mechanism?
That
you
was my
believe?
coping mechanism. I would literally leave work, go to my riding lesson, and return back to work to do a search warrant on a pedophile. But that hour that I spent riding kept me centered. I know that sounds crazy.
That's helpful. It's helpful stuff.
Horses are intuitive, and there would be days that I was having a crappy day and I would probably have to be going back to a search warrant, or I just talked to a 3-year-old about all the things her stepdad was doing. And I would get on my horse and we would warm up just easily. And then when I tried to get him to work, he would not cooperate. So I would spend the whole lesson frustrated and crying at my horse instead of at the crap I'm dealing with at work.
Yeah, you refocused your anger. Can't be the stuff at work. Let's put it all on my horse. He sensed your frustration or your anger or your angst?
They totally do. They read all of them. They really do. I think that's why I survived so long.
Phyllis and I both went through some horrible personal tragedies during our time as computer forensic examiners. Phyllis lost her husband. I lost my stepson. We also had stressors outside of the work that we were doing. You and I didn't have wonderful childhoods either. We didn't have two parents
Shut
that
up.
doted over us and supported us all the time. We came into this job with a lot of baggage. And I think that hurt us quite a bit. What's profound to me is if this can get somebody like Dave, it could get anybody. Dave was that man. He lived the life with the wife that he met when he was young. He had 2 beautiful children. He lived in a modest home. He was a decent, good man that showed love, that received love, and it broke him. It broke him. If it can break him, it can break anybody.
It broke him, and less time broke me.
Yes.
Because he's used to that security.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a completely different world. One of the things Dave mentioned in his interview is that he would call home to get grounded. He would call just to talk about dumb stuff, talk about shopping and what's for dinner. But it was important to bring you back into the world of this is what's actually going on. You are wading around in the sewage of this criminal world. If the criminal world was a city, this is in the sewers underneath, disgusting, it stinks, and nobody wants to smell it. Nobody wants to acknowledge that it's there, but it is.
This is the shit that even criminals don't do.
Yep. Criminals will kill you for doing this kind of stuff. This is the lowest of the low, and we are in those sewers all day, every day.
50 hours a week.
Yeah, hours and hours a day, case after case after case after case. So at some point, you have to bring yourself out of that world. What Dave would do is he would call home. He had a support system at home. Unfortunately for him, and you'll hear it from Dave, the dynamic between him not being able to discuss what he was doing and the effect it was having on his family completely broke down the relationship. He didn't realize that. You can't even talk about it with I can't discuss the videos I watch with my wife that I've been married to for over 20 years. You can't talk about it with anybody.
Nope.
That destroyed a good, decent man. He was a God-fearing husband and father who was doing something that he knew was so important that was going to change the world.
But it changed his whole life.
It destroyed his world. And he had a support system. What if you don't have a support system at home? What if you don't have anybody to help you get grounded? That's why this is so important. That's why shift trainings are so important. So that you can get that tool and you can sit in class and be like, this is so dumb. But you can go home then and go, holy shit, I tried that grounding exercise and it worked.
It does.
And you don't have to tell anybody. You can just quietly get the help that you need.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of shift. Every morning, everybody in that lab would load up into a Higgins boat and we would storm the beach. Every day. We would go in there and storm that beach. And we were all in it together. The minute your badge clicked that lab door open, you're in the Higgins boat right now and you're heading to the beach. Every one of us. So when, and that built camaraderie. We had special relationships with people. You don't get along with everybody in that world, but you respect them because they're in the same boat, heading to the same turrets that are going to be mowing them down. They're doing the same work you're doing. And I really think that built kind of a special camaraderie. Something that's very special to me.
I agree with that.
The command staff is typically so far disconnected from what's actually going on in any type of law enforcement investigative world. They're an administrator at this point, and they have been for 10, 15 years by the time they get up to that point. They're so far disconnected from what's actually happening. Now, a detective that you work with that works in burglary, and you work in crimes against children, think of how disconnected they are from what's actually going on. And now you have these policymakers that have no clue. They don't consider mental health. They're like, the whole department everybody gets 6 visits a year and you can get this. Everybody gets that. Take advantage of that program. But they don't know. And until they know what we're looking at, until they know it's infants and toddlers being raped, sodomized, abused, brutalized in a horrific manner, until they understand that and they realize that, what is their incentive to go above and beyond mental health wise? Right?
There is no incentive. You know what? Because it was pointed out very clearly to me that if I didn't want to do the job, somebody else would. But would they do it correctly and thoroughly, like they cared? Because, dude, I gave a shit about every single case.
And the answer to that question is no, they wouldn't. At least even if you knew the person coming in was more skilled and better than you, more talented than you at this job, you still would feel like they can't do it as well as. And in the back of your mind, it's going to take them at least 3 years to get to where you are.
At the base of where we were at.
Yeah, at least 3 years. And during that time, who's going to suffer? The victims.
Exactly. Yeah. Close to the end of my time in the unit. In 2012, the infinite wisdom of the Glendale Police Department decided to pull me out of the DPS lab and back to our police department so that we
Was that a surprise to you, or did they let you know this was coming?
Oh, no. They surprised me with it and basically told me that if I didn't want to do forensics from the lab we were going to make, that I could go back to patrol. But I explained to them all the things we do have at the lab. Because at the Department of Public Safety lab, we had 26 brains.
Yeah, there was a reason we were all in the same room
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
There was 26 brains. There was equipment. There was secured location. Our lab was a property room because we had property everywhere.
Think about the fact that people in that room, and not only do you have access to the best equipment, you have access to the best minds instantly. So if you run across a problem that you don't understand, it's not a phone call or an email and waiting for a response for 3 days. It is turning to your right and say, hey, do you know about this? And if they don't know, somebody in the lab does, right?
The lab was amazing.
Absolutely.
It was a plethora of wealth.
All crimes against children, computer forensic examiners should work in a group environment. Nobody should be alone. Even if you're in an agency that has 4 people and 1 guy that does it part-time, that when you do it, you should go somewhere where there's other people there to help you.
When they pulled me out, I was by myself in a 20 by 30 room alone with all of my computers and myself until the guys came in to eat lunch at the table, and then they would leave. I get pulled out of the lab.
What did they tell you the reason was? Or did they not tell you? They just did it and...
They were pulling me from the lab. My position was getting moved to fraud.
While they were developing their own
Yes.
computer forensic lab. So they pulled you over there so that the city of Glendale could create its own computer forensic lab.
I was the only one until probably 2013 or 14.
And then Harry came on, is that right?
That's when I was training Harry. Harry and I had our own little lab for a while. I was very close to retirement and I was barely making it to work at the time.
Why?
It was the work. The DPS commanders actually fought to get me not pulled out of the lab. And Glendale was told that they wouldn't get another spot back.
In the lab.
In the lab. But they still did it.
So DPS fought for you to stay
Yeah.
and told the city of Glendale, listen, we run a 25-person computer forensic lab, and we have a combined knowledge in there of hundreds of years of computer skills, and we urge you to leave her in an environment where she will not only flourish, she will be successful, but she will also have all the support that she needs, as well as equipment, training, software.
Well,
they urged you to stay there because not only are you in an environment where you have the ability to use other people's knowledge, but you also have a lot of knowledge that you shared as well. Let's not undermine the fact that you were one of those people that had seen the imagery for so long that you could easily identify known material. You were one of those people, Phyllis, that could identify imagery easily for someone. You could say, oh, that's part of this series, that's part of that series. And that's a very dubious honor to have. When I first started doing ICAC investigations, DPS had a lab down by where MVD was. And then they moved, I remember when they moved to the lab up north, up at Actic. And it completely changed everything. Now we had this environment of all these people working together, all this hive of knowledge and expertise and passion for the job. Whether it was technical passion for the computer stuff or for the work or both, you had that. And let's not discount not just instant support and knowledge, but levity and breaks.
Lunch.
And lunch and just laughing. We used to gather up. We had our tree of knowledge that was outside the lab, and we'd all go out there and we would take a break.
That was pipe tree.
Yeah, it was just this pine tree in the back corner of a parking lot. There's a little dirt spot. There was a garbage can with an ashtray and a wall. And it started, a couple of guys from DPS would go out there, and Dave Weller would go out with his pipe and he would smoke a pipe. And when I was a younger man, I had smoked a pipe here and there. I used that as an excuse to go out and smoke and then it just became this thing. And then Frank McCleary's going out, and then you're coming out, and then before you know it, we're all taking regular breaks. It like happened organically. We're all taking these regular breaks where we go out and we laugh and we have a good time. We joke with each other. We had some good serious talks out there. And then we come back in refreshed. And somehow we just organically came up with that. And that was so helpful. And man, that was something that you missed out on after that,
was
right?
so fun.
Because a lot of times you're working and you're buried and you don't think about taking a break. And somebody's walking by and they're like, hey, we're going outside. And you're like, hell yeah. And you go out and you chill and you have a nice conversation.
I got so far past the point of needing help that I was like, fuck it. I tried to get help after my dad died because I was literally going home at lunch to sleep. I was just so overwhelmed at the whole situation. I'm too loyal. And I was loyal to that work.
Even though it was destroying you.
I didn't realize it for a really long time.
But once you realized it was destroying you, were you still in the job?
Yeah, but I was so far gone.
So if you had to cut something out of your life to relieve the pressure, doing these investigations would be the last thing you'd cut out. Is that correct?
Yeah. Because you know what? There weren't people who could actually do them and push for it. Now I understand my PTSD, but I have different weaknesses every day. But I think that is my weakest point where I had to stop doing the job. I finally collapsed. Knew I couldn't do it anymore. I was not making it to work.
Were you drinking or doing anything to help cope with it?
Okay, so I was on so many pills.
Like prescription pills?
Yes. I wrecked a lot of motorcycles, a lot of dirt bikes. So starting in 2008, I was taking pain medication and muscle relaxers. And at that time, they gave you Soma. My regular doctor knew my pain doctor was giving me the Xanax, Diazepam to sleep. Because after about 2005, I didn't sleep more than 45 minutes at a time. I think I had more psychological pain than physical pain.
Were you using the medication to ease the psychological pain as well?
Yeah, because I could work. I could just numb myself and work through.
Yeah.
But the whole time, I was afraid that if I psychologically broke down, that my cases would go in the toilet. All the hands-on I had done. Maybe that's an irrational thought.
How did that make you feel about yourself?
Shitty. Because I had to hold my shit together, no matter what happened. Even though I don't really honestly remember a lot of 2011. After my husband passed, I just poured myself into work. You knew how many cases I was working. I was pulling cases left and right. Honestly, I don't remember 2011.
You were silently suffering, knowing this is breaking you down slowly, chipping away at your sanity, your moral compass on the world. Everything's going away.
But at that time, I didn't really know that's what it was because I had lost my dad and then my husband.
Yeah.
And so after Grant died, that's why I say I don't really remember a lot of 2011 because I worked. I poured myself into work because it was easier than staying at home.
Do you think if you didn't have the personal tragedy of losing your husband and the personal loss of your father compounding what was going on because of your casework, do you think if you didn't have that, you would have still ended up where you were?
Yeah, because I didn't really realize what the casework was doing to me. for a really long time.
What's intriguing about this is you are pouring yourself into something to help cope with one thing that is destroying you in another way. Helping you cope in
Yep.
one way, destroying you in another
So
way.
crazy, right?
Yes. Why was Phyllis so focused on the work and the cases and the victims that she couldn't see herself?
First of all, because it matters. Like, it matters to people who can't protect themselves. Like, it matters across the universe. It mattered to me. And if I could just focus on that, then the rest of my other pain wouldn't matter. I started tattooing, and then through all 2011, I just got more and more because the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain that I was dealing with.
Yeah.
That's how I ended up all tattoos everywhere. I wasn't getting any treatment while I was working. I knew I was going to retire in January of 2016 because honestly, I was barely making it to work at the time. They wanted me to close out my cases since they knew I was leaving, so I wouldn't have any more on my plate. So about 6 months prior to retirement, I went up to Violent Crimes and was doing case management for them.
How did retirement go? How was retirement?
Oh, it was miserable. I was not in a good spot because of my PTSD, and even still then not realizing how messed up I really was. I started to get some treatment, but I didn't have insurance, so then she started treating me for free because she saw how messed up I was, and I couldn't really hold a job. Like, I was a mess, and I cry all the time, so my outlet is to cry, whether I'm mad or sad or happy, or I just moved from job to job, not really doing anything relevant. I diesel mechanicked, I cleaned houses.
Why do you think you couldn't hold a job?
I just couldn't hold my shit together. Nobody wants to hire somebody who cries all the time. I literally could not hold my shit together for anything. And I was hyper vigilant and super aggressive. My anxiety was through the roof. If somebody looked at me wrong, I would freak out on them. And I still can't really tolerate large groups of people. Anything more than 20 and I'm out. I'm not going to do it. So the treatment I first started with was this tactile treatment where you hold these buzzers in your hands. And what it does is basically it refiles the memories without the emotion attached. And that worked for episodic things like Grant's death and my dad's death, because my dad's death was really traumatic. And then obviously Grant's death was spontaneous and super traumatic. So that kind of treatment worked more for things like that. But because my exposure to child crimes and exploitation was so continuous and contiguous, there was no break at all, that treatment really didn't help because it was more like script memory. Like you do the same thing every day and all the images just blur together at some point. I moved around a lot too. Like I was in California and Washington State and Montana and Florida and back to Arizona, all over the place. Camped in the forest for a couple of weeks because I didn't have anywhere to live. So it was 2 horses, 2 dogs, and a cat, and me in the forest in Montana. Yeah, it was crazy. So in 2019, when I ended up back in Arizona, my pain doctor, who I'd been working with, I was taking the medicine because I'd wrecked a motorcycle and blown out my neck. They did these things called a stellate ganglion block, where they put lidocaine into your ganglion gland, which is basically in front of your spine. It shuts off your fight or flight response at the basic level. And I got those for about a year, which kind of helped me reset my hypervigilance and bring me down to not a normal level, but a decent level that I could start managing my life a little bit better. And then my friend Joe, who worked for DEA, he got injured in Afghanistan, and he had gone to a place in Idaho for some hyperbaric treatment. He got me on board with them, and they gave me a grant to do 40 sessions of hyperbaric. It's 40 sessions in 30 days. So it's just
Mhm.
intense twice a day in a hyperbaric chamber. And I guess rebuilds the neurons. I don't even know how it works, but it worked. It took the edge off of my suicidal ideation that I had, because I was kind of like, my purpose is over, so why am I still here? But it knocked a lot of that off. I don't even have that anymore. So that's a good thing. I ended up moving to Idaho. So there was another organization called Mission 44 who also helps veterans and first responders. So I did another set of 40 treatments in the hyperbaric place. And since then, I've just basically been managing on my own.
What do you think could have helped you along the way to not get to the point that you got to?
Back then, we didn't really understand what it was going to do to us. We were canaries, basically. We didn't understand what 50 hours a week looking at exploitation was going to do to our brains. Honestly, I tell people it turned my brain to mush. After retirement, I was barely functioning. It was a
Yeah.
struggle. And plus you go from, I've always had a job and I've always had a good job. So then you're in the spiral of, oh, I don't have a job, I'm a piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. The retirement's hard on officers anyway. And then having that on top of it, it was just a mess.
Thank you so much to Phyllis for her candor and willingness to talk about all the suffering she endured, not only while doing these cases, but also in retirement. Phyllis is one of those people that you would have never known her, would have never heard her voice, never heard her story, because she's not one for the limelight. She's not one that wants the attention. She's just like everybody else, where she just wants to feel like she made a difference and she mattered. And I'm here to tell you 100% she made a difference, and 100% she mattered and still matters today. Thank you for listening to Harmless, the podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with people that you know who might find it interesting. And if there's someone you know that needs to hear this podcast, do not hesitate to share it with them. And if you need to share it anonymously, please email me at harmlessthepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.